welcome. You're watching Newsx and I'm Megha Sharma. Today we talk about the recently released book Unveiled, Inside Iran's Woman, Life, Freedom, Revolt. The book has been penned by award-winning British-Iranian journalist Jonathan Harounoff, who is now serving as Israel's international spokesperson to the United Nations. Unveiled demystifies the context leading up to the historic Women, Life, Freedom protests inside Iran and abroad and examines the potential future ramifications. The book chronicles the most existential challenge to have faced the Islamic Republic of Iran in its 46 years history, posed by the regime's own freedom-seeking women. In September 2022, shortly after the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman Mahsa Amini was killed by the regime's morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab too loosely, protests swept across Iran. Women ripped off their headscarves and set them alight. Others cut their hair in open defiance of the regime. Key industries and businesses were brought to a standstill amidst mass protests. Once revered banners of the country's supreme leader were incinerated. What made the protests most extraordinary was that in a deeply male-dominated society, women and girls, perhaps for the first time in the history of the modern Middle East, were front and center of the nationwide uprising, fervently calling for a freer Iran and chanting the now viral battle cry of women, life, freedom. Author Jonathan Harounoff draws on exclusive, heart-wrenching interviews with survivors of the Women, Life, Freedom protests and key Iranian opposition leaders in the diaspora. Jonathan Haroun joins me tonight. Let's start off that conversation with Jonathan. Thank you very much. And of course, at the outset, could you tell our viewers a little more about your book Unveiled, which is on Women, Life, Freedom, Revolt in Iran? What compelled you to pen this body of work, and what message do you wish to send across?
Great to be with you, and thank you for having me. There were many motivations behind writing my book, Unveiled, Inside Iran's Women, Life, Freedom, Revolt. On a personal note, it's a region where my family is from, and I'm intimately tied there, but also professionally and journalistically, I've always had a fascination in the Middle East, in Iran, in Israel, and the tensions that exist there. And I think I found that many people have an interest in Iran, but they don't have a very deep understanding of what's really happening in the region. So they may understand that the Islamic Republic currently reigns supreme there. They understand that there's a very damaging and expensive and dangerous nuclear weapons program that the Islamic Republic has been building, that they've cultivated a web of dangerous proxies. But if you ask them who the Iranian people are, what these 92 million people inside Iran are feeling, are thinking, what kind of relationship they would like to have with the West, with the United States, with Israel, people don't know. So I wanted to write a book where I interviewed Iranians on the ground and in the diaspora to understand their experiences under the regime. And the book's writing coincides with this massive women-led uprising that transformed Iran, following the killing of a young 22 Iranian Kurdish woman, Gina Mahsa Amini, in September of 2022.
Iran's women-led protest became a historic symbol of defiance. What do you think the world still misunderstands about Iranian women and their resistance march?
I think there are still some misperceptions around Iranian women and men. I think people don't realize just how vast the gulf is between the 46-year-old Islamic Republic and the Iranian Persian women and men whose history, whose civilization, whose culture spans thousands of years. Sometimes I think there's an assumption that the regime and its people share the same views, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Another misperception is that since the Women, Life, Freedom movement has sort of subsided a bit in terms of street protests, I think there's an assumption that the movement is completely dead, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You still see an incredible amount of defiance and courage displayed by women who are going around on the streets of Iran unveiled, and the risks are still there. The morality police is still there. The regime is still doing whatever it can to punish people who flout the country's strict dress codes. But the people of Iran are continuing to show extraordinary bravery and defiance in their multi-decade quest for freedom.
The Middle East has been fraught with tensions for a while, but we have seen a spike with the war, which has dragged on for 2 years. What do you make of the peace agreement that is now in place and the UNSC approval of the Trump administration's larger plan? Could an international stabilization force lead to a meaningful change and reconstruction of Gaza?
It was a very significant step that we saw at the United Nations Security Council with essentially the ratification of President Trump's 20 peace plan. And it's an important step because we can finally move forward beyond the first phase of the agreement, even though we're not completely done with it. And there are still 3 deceased hostages held in Gaza by Hamas. But we can move forward to the much thornier topic of how do we disarm Hamas? How do we demilitarize Gaza, and how do we move the region forward to a period of prosperity? And I'm hopeful that the construction of the International Stabilization Force can lead to greater peace. And I think there's a widespread recognition that Hamas cannot play a role in any future for Gaza if we want the region to be truly peaceful. So I'm hopeful, but I think there's a lot of work to do.
Now, Israel has recently carried out strikes in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. It has targeted Hezbollah infrastructure and one of its top commanders. This comes in the backdrop of the ceasefire condition of Hezbollah's disarmament, which were not being met despite America's best efforts. What message is Israel sending to Lebanon, Iran and the world at large by taking matters in its own hands?
I think the message is clear that Israel is a country focused and dedicated and desirable of peace. But when there are flagrant violations and attempts to destabilize the region and attack Israel, Israel will take necessary steps to defend its own people and protect its territorial integrity. And what we saw with the targeted and precise killing of the Hezbollah chief of staff was exactly that. This was a person who was hell-bent on the reconstruction and rebuilding of Hezbollah. He was a person with American-Israeli blood on his hands, with a $5 million bounty on his head. And if the Lebanese government weren't going to address the significant threat posed by individuals like him, then Israel had to take limited steps in order to prevent any threat on Israel's border. But Israel is committed to peace, committed to the ceasefire understandings that are currently in place, but it will also take necessary steps to enforce those agreements when there are violations occurring.
Do you see a scope for the expansion of the Abraham Accords? This month, US President Donald Trump announced that Kazakhstan is joining the Accords. There were murmurs that Saudi Arabia is eyeing the same as well. However, the latter decided it separate its defense dealings from the Accords. What is your assessment?
These are very positive steps indeed. And I think it's a signal that we are moving slowly beyond this period of conflict and animosity and hostility in the region that was very much orchestrated by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its proxies, including Hezbollah and Hamas. And I think now that Islamic Republic's proxy force has been defanged and the ring of fire that it erected around Israel has been pierced, we can move forward to a period where nations once again, like we saw on October the 6th, 2023, are beginning to talk about expanding the Abraham Accords, joining the Abraham Accords, and not just nations in the Middle East, as you rightly pointed out, nations beyond the Middle East that are buying into this vision of mutual collaboration, trade, thing. These are very positive steps that will help create a much more positive Middle East for everyone.
Coming back to Iran, we recently learned that Iran has rejected the International Atomic Energy Agency's call to cooperate, grant its inspectors access to Iranian nuclear sites, and provide precise information about its stockpile of near weapons-grade uranium. It went so far as to threaten unspecified retaliatory actions. Is the Iranian government in any position to do so, as on one hand the sanctions have adversely impacted its economy and on the other the regime is facing pressure domestically?
I think it's a sign of the Islamic Republic's misguided priorities, and that it's continued to be very laser focused on reconstructing its nuclear weapons program, which was significantly scaled back following the Israeli Operation Rising Lion, followed by the US Operation Midnight Hammer in June. But it's, as you rightly point out, there are very significant domestic issues underway inside Iran that are not being addressed, and this nuclear weapons stuff is being prioritized. And domestic issues, I mean, there's a very debilitating water crisis currently enveloping much of Iran, where 20 of Iran's 31 provinces haven't seen any rainwater since March, where the country's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has warned that Tehran, which is a megacity of around 10 million people, it's essentially on its knees, it's taking its last breaths, and it's on the verge of running out of water, where one of the 5 major dams inside Tehran, which is called the Amir Kabir Dam and responsible for supplying much of the city's drinking water, is currently at 8% capacity. And these are very, very serious issues, existentially threatening issues that are threatening the lives of ordinary Iranians. And instead of addressing these issues, which are a result of decades of corruption and mismanagement, the Islamic Republic seems to be focused more on arming itself, focusing on this nuclear weapons program, trying to rearm its proxies. And the people of Iran are noticing, and that's, I think, why there's so much resentment and animosity towards the regime by the people, because the regime is not addressing their very, very serious grievances.
Jonathan Harounoff, thank you very much for joining me. So there you have it, a book, Unveiled. It's called Unveiled, Inside Iran's Women, Life, Freedom, Revolt. You can buy your copy in your nearby bookstores, as well as it's available online. Thank you once again, Jonathan, for joining us and speaking to us on Newsx. Shifting our focus to other developments